Now, stay tuned to Vinyl Community Podcasts.
Buddies, back in the building. Hey, it's Concert Buddie here on Vinyl Community Podcasts. I've got a fun one. I'm already going to call it another fun conversation with my guest, the 2023, I think it's back in May, but 2023 Music Producers Guild Mastering Engineer of the Year, Cicely Balston. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you.
How does that sound? Because I wanted to make it really have a lot of pomp and circumstance, because that's a big deal. Like, how did it feel to win that award?
Oh, like, great. It was back in May. I'm still like chuffed. Like, it's back there somewhere. Oh no, gone the wrong way. Over there.
You're not one of the people who has it like as a doorstop, right? You do have it prominently displayed somewhere.
I got it in the studio, of course. I don't know about prominent. I just sort of keep it in the background things. Awesome. But no, it feels really good. It was very real honor, really. I know a lot of the previous winners and previous nominees, and just to be sort of up there among their number is a real accolade to me. Like, it's amazing. So yeah,
that's cool. Well, for the folks listening and then watching later, where I kind of started getting familiar with Cicely's work is through like Vinyl Me Please. You've been doing a lot of stuff with Vinyl Me Please and some reissues, and we'll kind of get into that. But you've been doing this for a minute. You've been doing it, and tell me if I miss any facts. This is my homework part of the performance and
see how up to date my bio is.
No, but it's an interesting bio because you started mastering in 2013. I think you started at Gearbox, which is an all analog operation, and then you joined Air Studios in 2016. Left for a second, came back in 2020, and been there ever since. Am I missing out anything in the career?
No, that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. That's it. So what made you want to become a mastering engineer? Were you a musician? Do you like the science behind it? Tell the audience how you came to this career.
Yeah. So I wanted to be in studios. I was kind of interested in the background of music. I play instruments, like, not, well, I always played instruments, particularly as a teenager, like at school, and I didn't really want to go and be a performer particularly. But I quite like maths, I quite like physics. I was interested in the sort of technical background and just sort of interested in what was going on behind the scenes of all the music that you can listen to. And so I went off and did a music and sound recording degree called the Tonmeister course, which is the one in the UK is at University of Surrey. And so that kind of teaches, the premise of that is it's like music, maths, physics, practical recording, and a lot of kind of theoretical audio engineering. And then on that course, so I did sort of recording, I did mixing, spent a lot of time in studios, learned a lot of the kind of technical basis for audio through that. And then I did a placement year when I was there in my third year, and I was at a few different studios actually, but one of them was Gearbox. So one of them was a mastering room. It was an all analog label at the time. It was releasing only on vinyl when I was there the first time. When I was there at first, and they just have this really beautiful studio. Lots of nice vintage gear. This really stunningly beautiful lathe called a Scully, which is like, it's all like cast metal. It's really nice. I think partly because I started doing vinyl as well as doing mastering, I've never done them separately, if that makes sense. Sure, I started doing vinyl from the start for me. I just wanted to keep up with that. Mastering I enjoyed because it's all the kind of studio side. It is working in music, it's working with artists, but you're sort of bringing a bit of a technical edge perhaps to the process. You have to actually do the correct format, so you have to do all that kind of side of things. And also I quite like, it's a real sort of honor to be able to finish people's records off, like to be able to be the last person in the process is quite fun.
Do you get because and not to bring my background into it, but I work for Nike at one point, but I always had personal pride and seeing what I contributed to, even on a very small scale. Do you have that personal pride, like if you're at the record shop or anywhere, knowing and seeing the work that you contributed to?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's there's like a bug on my screen.
I saw your Instagram post earlier. There is a bug.
No, there's a spider in here. I don't want to make it sound like the studio is full of bugs.
Infestation at air mastering. Look out.
How did that spider even get here? The doors are like, like airlock sealed almost. I don't know.
Wow.
It must have just like run in when someone opened the door and it saw its chance. What was I saying?
Oh, but like seeing titles you've worked on in the stores or out and about or listening to them. Yeah.
I think I get that not more with vinyl, like with digital mastering. It's amazing to like collaborate with people, and it's amazing when people bring you their music, and it's really cool to hear stuff and sort of be part of the process in that way. And with vinyl is like a thing that actually, you can find in a record shop, and we put our initials in the runouts and like all this kind of stuff, and like I quite like that side of things where it actually gets a bit more niche, that the sort of the part that you're having, but it's actually quite a tangible, tactile element to it.
For sure. So in like 200 years, when the human race has eradicated itself, there will still be these physical markers of the work that you've contributed out there somewhere, right?
yeah, it's cool. Yeah, someone will find that metal work and be like, Cicely.
Yeah, what is this? Yeah. That's funny. Well, one reason I wanted to talk to you, Cicely, is, and you said it earlier, is that you kind of got your feet wet in your career during the, again, quotation marks, air quotes, vinyl resurgence. And so I think it's a very interesting time because, obviously, popular music, not even popular music, independent music, there's a long history with vinyl and the format. And then obviously I don't need to walk people through the CD and digital and all that stuff. But do you, as a mastering engineer, I guess first and foremost, do you have a preference if you're working on a project to put it on vinyl? And is there a preference in your process on all that? Tell us about that.
There's not a preference. Okay. I think like whatever people feel is best for their music and for the way that they want to release. And like, I like vinyl, but it's not always going to be appropriate, and it's it's expensive to make. It's hard to store. So if you think that you're not going to have a market for it, then I wouldn't like begin to suggest someone like put something out on vinyl just because I like it or whatever.
Sure.
And the workflow, it's nice to know if I'm doing the digital mastering, they're like mastering for digital release, as well as the vinyl. It's good to know if something's going to go to vinyl because it does inform some decisions, but also I think it's quite important to keep it as an option amongst many, and to sort of not get, there was for a long time vinyl was the only way that you could release music,
right?
And so, fair enough if you're making decisions based on the vinyl, like how you shaped your album and like putting your ballad at the end of the side and like your second track at the, all this kind of stuff, the beginning of the B-side. And that's not really a constraint anymore. So like sometimes people ask me, I've been told this, I've been told you can only have X number of minutes on the side, I've been told. And I just slightly think that it's not quite worth like really restricting yourself,
your creative part,
necessarily your creative process, and like cutting, putting stuff onto vinyl, onto disc is a transfer process, and it's a craft, and part of that craft is doing it in the best way possible. But I wouldn't then, just because I might like consider the stereo bass or consider the whatever it is, whatever aspect of the music that I might need to consider in order to get something onto record, I wouldn't pass that on to the artist to be like, you shouldn't have put this in there in the first place. Like, I don't think that's necessary. I can advise and you can shape things, and it's nice when things work together, but if people want to, whatever, people got to do what they want to do.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to jump ahead in my thing a little bit because you hit on something I wanted to ask you about. In your role, do you consider yourself service oriented or results oriented, or maybe a little bit of both?
I think you might need to clarify the difference.
Well, in terms of like you were talking about, like it's not necessarily your position to say like your personal preference. You don't bring a personal bias into it versus, like is that the focus of serving the artist versus the labels like, hey, we need to get this done or we need to move these projects around, and is that the focus? Like, or is it a little bit both? I'm sure there's a juggling act because there's a lot of personalities and competing interests and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a both. I think probably a more service, probably more service based. I'm sort of quite aware that I'm only in at the end of the process.
Sure.
Maybe, I've not been part of something for years in the way that other members of the team will have been. But equally, it is my job to get things done and to get them finished and to be the person that says, you know what, this is done and it's good and we're finished. So sort of trying to sift through when there's a bit of a hold up or when there's a sort of something sort of blocking someone from finishing their music. It is, I guess, as much my job to work out what's causing that and how to get around it and how to kind of move things along.
Gotcha.
Because it is what I'm supposed to be doing is to deliver the final master.
There you go. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Talking about, and we'll get into your process here in a little bit, but what kind of volume would you say, like, it just depends on the project, or like, I guess a very high level ballpark, like what kind of output is it so many projects a week, a month? Like, how do you quantify
that? Yeah, quite a few a week, I guess.
And the reason I ask, I'm leading the witness here a little bit, is because I've heard, so friend of the program, George Borden, he's mastered some things before. And so I've kind of been asking him little questions in advance of our talk. But I mean, even I think Kevin Gray, I even heard a recent interview with Kevin Gray talking about like hundreds and thousands of projects in a year. And I had no idea it was that high volume churn when it came to being a mastering engineer.
Yeah, it is. Because we're not working on tape, the most real time is vinyl. And just obviously listening. It takes longer to master something, but like what we're trying to, well, at least what I think I'm bringing is a kind of fresh perspective, and something a bit objective. So I don't fly through things. I like taking the time. I often have to sort of send emails being like, you know what, I know I said I'd send this today, but I'd quite like to send it in a couple of days because I'd like to sit on it for a bit longer, have a little listen to some stuff and think about things. But equally, it's expected that we do quite a lot of work. And, I've spoken to people of other generations and I know that things used to be slower, and that's sort of just the music industry now, is this kind of like speed, speed of things. So I think it surprises people how much work we do.
Surprised me. I'm telling you, Cicely, it surprised me. When I heard Kevin Gray is Kevin Gray is one of the names, right? And I was like, wow, he's doing that much. It really was an eye opener for me.
I think, well, I do quite long shifts because I share the room, so I do fewer longer shifts. And so although I don't tend to do like multiple albums in a day or something, I might have like one project that I start and then something else that I finish and then something that I cut and then something that I do tweaks to, or like whatever.
Do you find that keeps you fresh? It keeps you fresh on each project, balancing it out like that, as opposed to just like saying tunnel vision on one project?
Yeah, I kind of have to go. Yeah, have to work it out really. Since starting doing these shifts like 3 years ago or so, I had to get. It sort of caused me to get incredibly introspective about how I work, which is a good and bad thing, I think.
So what you're saying is this is not a typical 9 to 5 type of career choice. Okay, I just want to be clear.
No, it's not. There's not. We don't by any means do such wild hours as, for example, my colleagues in the rest of the studio doing on sessions. That can be, but because we're listening critically, and there is a time limit on that. Like there's some things that you can do some work that we can do at the point that you're really tired. But like everyone, we've got emails to do, we've got invoicing to do. Of course. But yeah, you can't actually bring that kind of fresh perspective if you're just tired.
For sure. Now I have to disclose, I did not share my notes in advance, but Cicely, we're really simpatico here, because now next question was, how important is critical listening to your process? So I'm not making this up. You literally are taking words out of my mouth. So I like what's going on here. Yeah.
You do so well. Yeah, well, critical listening is everything. Like there is no, critical listening is all I do. I don't have a chain. I've got equipment. You can't see any of it. I just pointed to it. But,
it's there. I guarantee you.
It's around me. I've got pieces of equipment. I've got go-to plugins and stuff, and that's just because how they sound. I know how I want things to. When I've decided what I want to happen, I then know how to get it to happen.
Sure.
But I don't have anything that I will always use. I will always check. Always make sure it's working. I mean, I think that was something that was quite drilled into me by Ray Staff, who I learnt from.
Okay.
Who I learned a lot from. Mastering, we're not dealing in. We can make a big difference, but within kind of defined boundaries. Like we're normally working on the stereo WAV, where so the mix is basically there. So the amount of creative difference that happens between a song not existing and it being mixed is obviously vast. Whereas between it being mixed and mastered can be quite a big sonic difference, but isn't anything like in that scale. But it's just because we're dealing in that kind of difference, it's just really important that everything that I'm doing is serving the purpose that I'm trying to make the music sound better or clearer or more effective or whatever it is. So yeah, critical listening. I just sit here all day going, is that better? Do I like it? Do I not? Yeah.
Right. Do you ever find that, and this is, I apologize if this comes off as naive, but do you ever find, depending on the project you're working on, do you ever have to fight off or be cognizant of any kind of personal bias? Like if you're working on and I was reading that you worked on some of the Bowie back catalog at one point, knowing it's Bowie, right? Do you ever find yourself maybe putting some pressure or having to remain objective and remind yourself the task is this, as much as you admire or appreciate this artist's legacy, this is the task at hand?
Yeah. I think it's hard not to.
It's human nature, right? Exactly.
Something like Bowie, not only are millions of people going to listen to it, but it's music that a lot of people have a very strong emotional connection to already. And so, people have strong opinions, they're entitled to them. But you sort of don't want to get that one wrong or
of course not, right? Yeah.
Put yourself in the firing line. But you kind of got to trust in the process and trust in the collaboration. The Bowie project, as an example, was always very, very closely done with a lot of people who had stakes in the music. So Nigel Reeve, who was kind of producing it all, basically was the overseeing the whole thing. It was very, very close with the Bowie estate and knew Bowie himself, and so as wherever possible, decisions were made by the right decision makers, and things were signed off by the right people, and so you sort of have to trust in that, and trust that people will come to you. In this instance, that was Ray mastering that, and I was assisting on a lot of it. But trust that people will come to you for your actual opinion, and so try and sort of give it as honestly as possible.
Makes sense. You mentioned Ray before. This is one of my questions I had about mentorship, especially as you're getting started. But now that you're getting these accolades, you're getting a really diverse portfolio of projects you've worked on. How important is the mentor-mentee relationship, and are you in a position, or do you feel you're comfortable in a position to now be a mentor to somebody else?
Yeah, the mentor-mentee is definitely a big one, and has benefited me, I guess is the wrong word, but Air. So I moved to Air in 2016. I was at Gearbox for a year of placement, and then I went back for a bit. after I graduated. And they were really great, and I learned a lot there. And then we kind of sort of started to do digital releases, digital mastering. And because I was the only one at that time that knew kind of the digital side of things, I was doing it, and I kind of thought, well, actually, I don't really know. Didn't feel like I knew enough about it.
Okay.
And then when the job at Air came up, sort of, because they were, it's a sort of small world. They were looking for someone that had already started mastering, but hadn't got too far down that kind of line yet. But to teach, Ray was
right.
looking to start thinking about retiring and thinking about stepping down. So we wanted someone to come on to kind of be the assistant, and that was completely formative for me, because not only did I get some, he's a complete legend. He's an amazing engineer, and I was very lucky to cross paths with him at a time when he was really looking to share a lot. And then I could, I was very involved in his projects because he was also looking to step down. And then more widely, the industry actually is quite small, the music industry, mastering particularly. And I think it's really, I've been very lucky I know a lot of fellow mastering engineers, and people are very kind and open.
So there's a lot of sharing of like best practices or knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, you've got to kind of not ask too much. I'm not sort of like going in saying, pretending not to know anything or whatever, but just, if there's some issue, I don't know, and you've not come across it, or we know that a batch of lacquers is a bit dodgy or whatever, there's a network there, and we can share that information, and it benefits everyone. And so well, am I ready to be a mentor? I think I would struggle to have a sort of full-time assistant, just because I think I'm still learning a lot, and there isn't that much. It's a hard, having someone shadowing is quite a sort of energy consuming thing to do. It worked for me and Ray because he could just come in for the sessions and I did everything else. So he sort of just flew in, sat down, did the mastering, and then he'd go, and I was doing all the parts and all the communication and the sort of tape transfers and
clearly defined roles, and
was set up quite well. But I've always, this is a trickier thing to say on this kind of open format, but I'm pretty open. If people come and want to meet me, I don't mind, because I've done a lot of that, and I will carry on doing a lot of that. I had someone actually ask for mentoring not too long ago, and they kind of said that they had some funding and stuff, and I was like, I don't want to sort of be teaching in a sort of paid position. That doesn't really work for me, but it's really nice to know you, come and see my studio, come and chat and form the connection, so that the network is there. I think that side of things is important.
Sure.
I think it's really
makes sense. Talking about some of the engineers that came before you, and is there a certain, do you study the Bernie Grudmans or the George Piros or whoever? Do you study? Because I don't know if there's necessarily a style. Do you think that yours, because it's not the Cicely Balston style or sound, right? Do you kind of, as a fellow mastering engineer now on this side, do you kind of listen to some of their work and kind of take cues from things you hear?
Not really.
Okay.
No, maybe I should, but you never know what's the mix and what's the master. You so rarely get to hear that kind of that difference. You don't really know what people have done. It was quite interesting. I judged the MPGs the year before I won it, and I think that's the first time in depth I've had to really listen to sort of before and after mix to master sort of tracks, because you don't normally get that. And also I think I listen to music critically in the wider sense, work out what people are doing level wise and sonically and stuff, but I don't think it's possible to know who exactly
Unless you're in the room,
anyone
right? Yeah, for sure.
come from, so I wouldn't like go away and be like, oh, this is what this person sounds like. Per se, it's cool to sort of see Rudy Van Gelders who are designing their own equipment and
For sure.
this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think I don't tend to disappear down a rabbit hole of what everyone else is doing, trying to work out what everyone else is doing.
Are there some contemporaries reviewers? Because as a record collector, a record connoisseur, I know when I was really learning about that part of the recording aspect, again, Bernie, you hear all the same names: Kevin Gray, Chris Chris Bellman, excuse me. But like, do you find yourself having or finding the space with a lot of folks coming up and learning things kind of generationally? Like, do you find yourself as part of a new generation? Like, for example, like Ryan K. Smith, I feel is like on the, I hate to say it's the younger side, right? Like, can you compare to like Bernie and those guys? Do you find like you have a lot of contemporaries, or like you said, it's a very kind of small area of expertise? Is there not a lot of folks doing the mastering engineer now?
Yeah, I mean, there are for sure, but sort of few enough to know most of them. And yeah, I mean, I do have I get this is a kind of a UK US thing, isn't it? Like,
sure.
Like there's some I'm really good friends with. I'm really good friends with Ollie Morgan over Abbey Road.
Okay.
Because we were kind of similarly assisting at the same time, and then we kind of just like, so we're sort of friends separately. It's really nice to have like someone who is the same age and doing the same thing. Because it's not like most jobs where you can sort of know what the wider world looks like if your job is present elsewhere. I mean, we all know each other. Katie, like, and then it's also a whole spectrum. Kevin's moved over to Berlin, and
okay.
I don't know who else to name. I know lots of them.
No, for sure. Talking about your process, what not to get too like deep into the weeds, but is it safe to say that there's a queue of jobs that come in, and then is it literally first in, first out? Is there prioritization? How does that work in terms of the projects you choose to work on and when you choose to work on them?
There's normally normally I can tell someone when I'm going to do their work. So someone emails, says, I want you to cut this to record or master this. And I just say when my next availability is. And sometimes it can be flexible if they're in a massive rush. Sometimes I can move things around, put them in that day. Sometimes they can wait a bit. Normally people email at the point that they're ready. So everything's normally quite quick turnaround, like within a week or something. I might try and fit something in. But equally, they sometimes also email when they know that they're about to go into the mix, just to check your availability, and then you can kind of pick a day and and find out. And sort of it's always nice to know the ones that have a bit more time, because there's always something that needs to get done really quickly. And so, as I was saying earlier, I get quite like, you have a kind of day that does that, and and it's really important to be aware of how I'm hearing things and how I'm feeling about it, and so it's sort of, I generally have a bit of an idea of what things I can kind of say actually didn't get to this with the sort of capacity that I would like. Do you mind if I send this to you over, a couple of days or whatever?
If you have more time, do you find yourself, I wouldn't say obsessing, but like if you have more time, do you spend, will you go back to certain things and kind of spend more time massaging them? And if so, how do you know when something is done? When you're like, you can always keep tweaking. You can always keep trying to improve and reach perfection, right? Like how do you decide between it's good finished product versus chasing the ghost of perfection?
Yeah, well, because I think like you can recognize when you get to a point where you're not really doing any benefit, when you can't hear any difference. You're putting things in and you're going, well, actually, I don't really care. Because I'm not having any response to one thing or another, and that like nothing you're doing is making it any better. Then that's probably a good point to stop. Everyone's it would be nice to have as much time as whatever.
Unlimited time,
right
yeah, of course.
every time, and we live in the real world and you don't. So yeah, and different people. Sometimes it's nice when people come in to attend, so that you can sort of explore those options together. Like I have producers and mix engineers particularly that I work with that's completely cool if they want to come in, because I know that we might even end up doing stuff that I wasn't expecting to do because they're right there and I can just ask. Whereas if they weren't there, the kind of back and forth required of sending a whole song to just explore sort of lots of different options doesn't always end up with the best result.
Sure.
Yeah.
How important is like client input, be it the actual artist or be it the label or producers or folks with their hand in the flower? How important is that to your process and making sure that you're staying true to what you're listening to and creating and finishing versus maybe what they're hearing? Because obviously hearing can be subjective and in rooms and different places. So there's a lot of different variables that go into it. But how much input does that factor into your total output?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. I think a lot about the person that has sent me the work in the first place, and then it can get a bit not trickier, but sometimes it's not the artist, so then it needs to go to them too. But I would always want the people whose music it is to be happy, with the result. It's not mine to say, oh, it should definitely be like this, but I can give my opinion and I can say why I've done something, and then we can get to the bottom of how to do that same thing but in a different way if that's needed, if a different approach is needed. With albums and things, I tend to try and do a couple of tracks first just as kind of refs so that people can hear if they're not attending.
A sample of where you're going with it. Sure.
Yeah, or even if they are attending, do that before they come in because they don't know this room, they don't know my speakers. And then everyone sort of gets on the same page, and then you can just work together to move forward, as opposed to sort of spending too much time. It happens occasionally in attended sessions, you spend lots of time in the attended session, and they're going, yeah, we like it, and then they get home and listen to it at home and go, actually
we
it doesn't sound how we thought it was going to. And sure. You can change the approach. It's engineering. There's lots of different ways that things can sound. That stuff is subjective. So I wouldn't yet turn around and say no, like you're wrong, I'm right. Like, it's not my music, of course I wouldn't.
Right. How often
will come in like 40 years time or something? Yeah, 30 years.
For sure. How often are artists or other decision makers? I'll just maybe generalize like that in the room, listening and kind of giving you feedback. Is that pretty common, or is it just depends on the project? Or?
It just depends on the project. Most weeks, someone will come in for one of the days probably, but whether that's because they're someone that I know personally, so they just want to come and hang out for a bit, but they're not really looking to have a massive input, or whether they want to come and really check everything that you're doing and make sure they're happy with it, completely varies.
Makes sense. All right, well, last one I have for before we get to the lightning round, the fun questions, is talking a little bit about the digital mastering piece. I was listening to an interview you did talking about metadata. How important is metadata, especially now? Because I think you're explaining it in the context of royalties, right? And it's something I hadn't thought about. And my work on the podcast, I am loosely familiar with metadata as I'm writing it into our productions. How important is that, and what does that really what does that drive? Is it primarily the royalties piece, or is it also like SEO, like search engine optimization type of things, or how's that work?
Yeah, I think SEO, it's literally the only thing that you can really put into a WAV at the moment is an ISRC. I mean, there is some provision for other stuff, but I don't think most pieces of software other than dedicated mastering things can read any of that back out. But ISRCs are, I think I was talking, that would have been what I was talking about. They're useful because they are what points. Any of the automated systems, as far as I know, have been based on those, and so that they're what points whatever system is looking at it towards the people whose music it is. But there isn't any other metadata that can really be implemented into the WAVs, and otherwise it's stuff that gets typed up, presumably at the point that it kind of gets uploaded or whatever. And so it's not really metadata in that way because it's not embedded into the file. It's just data that gets inputted somewhere. So it's important for royalties, and it's worth for credits. And eventually, when these kind of systems start, the sort of credit system seems to be gaining traction. The kind of
recognition, more and more vital in the industry. Sure,
yeah, and it being published and it being sort of held together with in centrally in a way that people can actually search and find and
sure. Yeah. All right, here comes the fun portion of the conversation. If it hasn't been fun yet, it's about to get fun, I hope. So you've worked with, and again, I kind of said this at the open. I started to get familiar with your work through like the Vinyl Me Please projects you've been doing, right? And it's a very diverse a bunch of artists and projects from like the Busta Rhymes reissue. It was one. You did the Chileno Sanchez, a recent, I believe, if I saw that. So does that kind of add a little flavor to what you do to have such a wide offering of artists, musical styles, all that kind of stuff, and kind of like make the day in some instances funner?
Yeah, for sure. It's great. It's also one of the great things about mastering is like how diverse a week can be. I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to say any of the people, so I had to keep it like separate to the artists. But I went from like, contemporary classical to like classic metal to like, sure. Upcoming indie, like, in a day almost a couple of weeks ago. And it was a particularly enjoyable week. Yeah.
Nice. Is there, I wouldn't say a signature project, but a project or two that you're particularly fond of for whatever reason? It could have been working with the artist. It could have been the magnitude of the project. Is there if it's kind of like they're all your babies, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you can't pick a favorite, but at least top of mind, what are some that you're really proud of?
So like very recent announcement, an artist called Girly, whose album's actually coming out next year. And I just love every track on that album, and it was just great. I just like quite, it's my job to do mastering, so it's pretty rare that I get so distracted by the music that I stop working. But that definitely happened with this one. I think like working on things for people that it's a really nice thing working with your friends.
Okay.
So I think I don't know if it's out yet, but it's only announced and it's on vinyl as well. It's a guy called Daniel Gadd, who's a composer. It's a really beautiful sounding album, and I think the vinyl sounds really nice. And it's like it's produced by a friend of mine, and it's someone the producer, someone I've known for like 10, 12 years or something, more than that. We used to live together when we were like,
oh wow, small world.
So it's like that's really nice. What else? I mean, the Bowie stuff was an incredible project, just because what other artists you get to listen to? What other artists is so rewarding to listen to, in complete chronologically, every sort of demo, every live concert that went with every tour, that went with every album. That kind of in-depth knowledge was incredible. Yeah. What else?
No, that's good. We don't hurt anybody's feelings, Cicely. We don't hurt anybody's feelings if you didn't.
No, it's exactly hard. It's hard to pick. I do. It is nice to work on everything. It's always nice when you suddenly get tagged in something and you think, "Oh God, that's out now! Great!" Like,
sure.
you never know how long it's going to be between mastering it and it coming out. And and seeing the response to it and seeing the sort of people posting about things in their own words. It's really nice.
So after listening to music all day, like the work and limited to I just want to read a book, I just want to go for a walk, I just want to have that kind of boundary. Like, how do you find yourself balancing that out?
I fluctuate. I definitely go and see live music. I love going to gigs and seeing people. I'm actually going to an album launch this evening. But then a friend of mine texted me saying, did I want to go to the Nothing But Thieves show? And I was very torn, but I'm going to go to the album launch. Yeah, live music, great. Listening to music at home does fluctuate, I think. Just because I listen to a lot of stuff. So sometimes it's nice to take the break. But equally, I think because I work in music, the times that I am listening, I can really lean into the listening purely because I like it.
Sure.
Purely because that is what I want to be listening to in that moment, whether it's some completely random record that my granddad used to have, or it went through a big kind of like slightly punky, sort of angry like music phase where I was like doing a lot of running and like listening to angry, and it was great. Like, that's fun. So you can sort of like really lean into your nostalgic, like the things that I would have listened to when I was a teenager or whatever. Obviously I do a lot of listening for kind of general knowledge, as it were,
of course,
for my work. But so the times that I'm listening and trying to get better at just sort of just tapping into that really core kind of feeling of what I want to be listening to.
Makes sense. All right, so this last one, no pressure. The last one. What kind of record collection does a mastering engineer have? Do you have like this wall to wall, or you're like, hey, you know what? I've only got a couple cubes. What does your record collection in particular, Cicely, look like?
Yeah, so it's not huge. It's about like 1.5 meters long, perhaps, one record. It would be nice to have more, but I'm 31 and I live in London, so I move house maybe every year. And having a record collection is a heavy thing to move every time.
That's where you have to do a lot of intentional listening and intentional ownership, right?
Yeah. It would be nice. But yeah, when I can stay somewhere, when I can live somewhere for a bit longer in one go, then I'll probably start buying more records again. But I've got a sort of amp and a record player that I've been lugging around every move. Yeah, so it's not huge, but it would be nice to have more.
Well, you heard it here first. This is the beginning of you. You're going to amass a giant record collection. I can just see it in your future. You're going to have a big one of these days. I
think it's like really nice memories of like friends' houses. That I have one friend in particular where music was always on in their house, and they had a lot of CDs. Dad worked in radio. She still works in radio now. And I just have a really, you go into the house and here's just put on a record or a CD or whatever. And I think the physical side of it just makes all the difference. So you look at all the titles, you like decide what you want to listen to.
For sure.
I think that's really nice than someone handing you a phone and Spotify and being like, what do you want to listen to? And you have all of music ever. Like, there's quite a lot to choose between. Yeah, that's my dream for myself. It'll happen.
We're going to make it happen. Awesome. Well, Cicely Balston, thank you so much for the time. It was a real treat. Again, keep up the great work. There's all these titles, like I said, Vinyl Me Please. I know you're working with a lot of other labels, but especially the hip hop, the metal, all the stuff that was so foreign to vinyl production for whatever reason. I don't know why. There was a real appetite for it, and I find you in the mix of it a lot, and so that's why I was like, I've got to talk to her because I got to thank her first and foremost. But keep up the great work because these albums.
Cool. It's been awesome. Really fun. All that hip hop, particularly, it's been like a real. I love like looking at the credits and seeing who's on each other's records and like trying to piece together this sort of whole scene. Yeah. Well,
that's how I found you because I would get these Vinyl Me Please, right, and I'm like, man, this sounds great. And then I think Young MC, I think you touched that one too. Yeah. And I was like, man, this sounds great too. And then I saw it saying a common thread, and I'm like, I've got to talk to her because one, I wanted to thank you, and two, I wanted to tell you, keep up the great work. It's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. That's very nice.
Well, I appreciate the time. Again, Concert Buddie signing off, Vinyl Community Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, Cicely.
Thanks for having me.
And that was another trip around the turntable. Thanks for listening to Vinyl Community Podcasts.